In this tutorial, we're going to do our univariate categorical exploration. So the first thing we need to do is create a new worksheet so that we can house all of that univariate analysis. I'm going to click on the plus sign at the bottom of my workbook right next to clean data to create a new worksheet and label it Uni Cat Explore. This way I know all of my univariate exploratory data analysis for categorical variables is right here. Next, we'll need to copy over our categorical variables. I'm going to go back to my Clean Data tab and copy my two categorical variables from my lab set, borough, and overall quality. Control-C to copy. Okay, and then we're going to go to the Univariate Categorical Exploration tab and paste those values. All right. Now we need to create pivot tables. The good thing is we've already learned how to do this in the data diagnosis when we were just trying to figure out if there were any misspelled categories or errors that we needed to address. So we're going to go through the same process. Now we're just working with clean data, and we're going to clean it up and format it so that it communicates the distribution of each of these variables. I'm going to select both column letters A and B. Then I'm going to go to my Insert ribbon, one to the right of the Home ribbon, and select my Pivot Table tool. I'm going to check my range to make sure that it's selected the data properly. It's letting me know that it has columns A and B selected from the UniCat Explore worksheet. That looks good to me. The next thing I need to do is tell Excel where I want this table to be placed. So I don't want it in a new worksheet. I want to keep everything within this one worksheet that pertains to a univariate categorical data analysis. So I'll click the button for existing worksheet and select a cell that's to the right of the data towards the top of my worksheet. Then I'll click OK. Now I have my pivot table report builder. I just need to add some information to it. I'm going to select my borough variable and drag it to the rows, and then I'll select it again and drag it to the values. All right, so I have my labels for all my categories and I have their frequency counts. This is a good start, but we need to do a lot of cleaning, and we also need to calculate the percent. Okay, I am going to copy this information over to a new table to the right, but I want to make sure that I only take the information that I need. So I don't need this blank row. I can actually disable that by clicking this filter drop-down and unchecking blank. Press OK. All right, that's better. The next thing is selecting kind of the criteria from the table that I actually want in my frequency table. I want my categories and I want their frequencies, and I'd also like the total row. So I'm going to highlight those, Control-C to copy, and then we're just going to paste those as values to the right of the pivot table. I don't want to copy over my pivot table directly because it will have that pivot table functionality that might make it a little bit hard to clean up and format later on. So we'll right-click here and select the option to paste as values. You can also use this paste drop down here and select paste as values as well. Two ways you can do the same thing. Let's expand the width of these columns so that we can read the data a little better. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is calculate the percentages of each of these categories. Okay. The way that we do that is we take the frequency for one category and divide it by the grand total. Okay, and there's a way that we can do this to make our lives quick and easy, make this process quick and easy. So we'll start with the equal sign, and we want to select the frequency for the first category we want to calculate the percent for. We'll select that frequency using cell referencing, and then we're going to divide it by the cell with the total. Now, there's one more thing I need to do. If I were to just take this formula and drag it down to calculate the percentages for all my categories, not only is it going to shift my numerator reference from H4 to H5 to H6 as I drag, but it's also going to shift my denominator reference from H10 to H11 to H12 to H13. That means it's not going to be dividing these subsequent categories by the grand total. In order to prevent that, we need to lock in that total cell. And the way we do that is with dollar signs. If we put a dollar sign in front of the H and a dollar sign in front of the 10 and the denominator, then when we click and drag that formula down, it will not shift the reference of that cell, but it will shift the numerator, allowing it to calculate the percentage for each of the subsequent categories. There's a couple ways we can do this. If you hit function F4, you can see now it's automatically added those dollar signs to the H and to the 10. If this doesn't work for you, you can always go in and manually type in those dollar signs. Whatever works. Okay. When we do have those dollar signs, this is locking in column H. It's locking in row 10, which is going to make sure that the reference for that cell with the grand total value does not shift when I drag down this formula. Press enter. Let's select the cell where we just calculated that percentage. We're going to go to the bottom right corner where we have that little green box, and then we're going to click and drag down. Okay. Now if we click in any of these cells, we can see now that while the numerator did shift, the denominator didn't. So now we've calculated an accurate percentage for each of these categories. The next thing we might want to do is format it as a percent. Right now they're in relative frequencies, which is sometimes hard to read. If we communicate it in a percentage, then it's something that's a little bit easier to wrap our heads around. So we'll change that to percent, maybe add 1 decimal place for a little bit of extra information. The next thing we need to do is add titles, labels, and then clean up the category labels. We'll add some borders and shading and make this table nice and neat and ready to go in our report. So the label above this is just going to be the category name. These are the boroughs within this community. This next column over are the frequency counts, or the number of times that each borough appears within the data. Next column over is the percent, or the relative measure for the number of proportion that these categories appear in the data. So out of all the houses in the data, 1.4% of them are from the Brookdale community. 26.6% of them are from the Brookside community, okay, and so on and so forth. Next, we'll add a nice descriptive title. This will be frequency table for borough. Okay. We don't need to add a sample size to this title because it is part of the visualization in and of itself, but we do want to merge this title over the top of our table so that we can make it look neat and ready to go in our report. Let's click in the title row, drag down to the total row, and add those borders. We'll add some shading to make distinct parts between the title, the headers, and the body of the table. Maybe add some shading to this total row down here. I generally like to just call it total instead of grand total. Keep it simple when we can. And then the very last thing is just to update these labels. Now, these weren't given to us in our data dictionary, I don't believe, but we can type them in now based on the knowledge that I have. So this is our Brookdale borough. This is our Brookside borough. This is our Crawford borough. This is our North Ames borough. This is our North Ridge borough, and this is our Somerset borough. Okay, so now it's really easy to tell each of these categories and how they appear in the data. Lastly, we might want to control the column width. Okay, just make it look consistent. I often like to center these values within the cell. But all these are just preferences. If your table is descriptive, well formatted, and communicates the data well, that's all we really care about. All right, so now let's go through the same process to create the frequency table for overall quality. I can just go over here to my pivot table, uncheck borough, and drag our overall quality variable to the rows and to the values. Now we have one more step with our overall quality table. Because this is an ordinal variable, we have to ensure that those labels appear in order. When I look at my pivot table, I see that very excellent is coming before very poor in this table just because of the way that it's sorting the data. We can easily just click and drag that category to the bottom of the table in this way. So we'll select that row from our pivot table, and we see this little green border around it. Once we see that green border, we can hover over it until we get that multi-directional arrow, and that will allow us to click and drag that category into place. Now we can see that these categories are in order. So for any pivot table, you can click and drag to determine where your categories are going to be displayed. The next thing we want to do is remove that blanks row. It's not adding anything useful to our table. We'll go ahead and remove it now before we copy over the values. Last thing, we're going to copy over these values here from the table, and we're going to paste them as values to the right of our borough frequency table. So I'm in cell K4, I'll right click and paste as values. Now we'll widen these a little bit so it's a little bit easier to look at. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of is some formatting that I already have enabled. Okay, I can take over the title and the column labels here because they're going to be the same for this next table with the exception of the borough label. So I'm going to highlight my title and my row of labels, Control C, and then just paste it here. We'll change this to overall quality. And then we'll also need to let the title indicate that this is overall quality as well. Last thing, calculate those percentages. Frequency divided by grand total. We're going to lock that cell in. Remember, we can use function F4 or just add the dollar signs in front of the L and in front of the 13. Okay, after we have that denominator cell locked in and we see that everything's working, we will click and drag down. Right? We'll format this as a percent, add a decimal, give it a little bit more information, some borders and shading. Okay, we can copy this total row if we want. It communicates the exact same thing. And then finally, we'll update our category labels. So we want to make sure that reader knows exactly what each of these means. VPO doesn't necessarily tell them much. So we'll complete the label as very poor. Next one down is fair. Next one down, below average. Next one down, typical average. Next one down, above average. Next one down is good. Next one down is very good. Excellent. Very excellent. And now we're good to go. We might want to widen these columns a little bit so that they're consistent in size. Maybe center these values here. Again, these are just formatting options you can take to make sure your table is nice and neat. As long as it has a descriptive title, descriptive labels, and communicates the information fully, that's all we really care about. So there's your tutorial on how to create those frequency tables. For your homework, you'll go through and create these frequency tables for the two categorical variables in your subset.